What happens when the man pinned to the ground by police is the very person in charge of the entire department? Get your hands where I can see them. The words hit like a thunderclap in the cool night air outside a downtown Dallas steakhouse. Cars whooshed past on Main Street, headlights cutting across the brick sidewalks. Couples laughed as they walked out of restaurants nearby, their nights untouched by what was unfolding just a few feet away, but not for Anthony Rhodes. Anthony, a 44-year-old man with salt and pepper hair and a strong but calm presence, had just finished a late dinner with his wife. He was wearing jeans, a button-up shirt, nothing flashy, just a man heading home after a long day. He had parked his unmarked black Chevy Tahoe near the corner, away from the valet line. And that's when the squad car pulled up. 2 officers jumped out, voices sharp, flashlights cutting through the night, their boots slapped against the pavement, urgent and commanding. "Step away from the vehicle!" "Now!" Anthony raised his hands immediately, palms open. His voice was steady, low, trying to diffuse. "All right, I hear you." "My hands are up." "What's the problem, officers?" But instead of an answer, one officer rushed forward, yanking Anthony's arm, twisting it behind his back. The other pushed him toward the hood of his own car. His wife, still standing by the restaurant door, gasped. "Wait, what are you doing?" "He hasn't done anything," she shouted. People nearby slowed their steps. Some pulled out phones. Others kept walking, pretending not to see. Anthony kept his eyes forward, his cheek pressed against the cold metal of the Tahoe. His breathing was controlled, but his mind was racing. He knew this wasn't about what he'd done. It was about what they thought they saw. A black man, late at night, near a nice restaurant, climbing into an SUV. To them, it looked like trouble. The street noise seemed to fade. The only thing Anthony could focus on was the grip on his wrists, the knee pressing into his back, the sharp words in his ear. "You think you're slick, huh?" Out here looking suspicious, Anthony didn't fight back. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he spoke with the same patience he'd learned over years of working in law enforcement. "Officer, I think you're making a mistake." But they weren't listening. Not yet. And that's when the moment every bystander thought they understood suddenly shifted, and the night took a turn no one expected. Earlier that night, things felt normal. Anthony Rhodes and his wife Denise had decided to treat themselves after a long week. Denise had been pushing him for weeks to slow down, to take a night where work didn't follow him around like a shadow. They chose Pappas Brothers, steakhouse in Dallas, a spot Anthony loved, not just for the food, but for the quiet corners where he and Denise could actually talk. The low lights, the soft music, the smell of charred ribeye drifting through the air. It was one of the few places where Anthony felt like the world outside couldn't touch him. Denise swirled her wine and leaned across the table. "You know you work too much, right?" she teased. Anthony smirked, cutting into his steak. "Somebody's got to keep this city in one piece." "Yeah, but that somebody doesn't always have to be you," she shot back, raising an eyebrow. For a moment, they just laughed. It was the kind of laughter that felt like a release valve. No headlines, no phone calls, no pressure. Just them. When the plates were cleared and dessert had come and gone, Anthony insisted on skipping valet. "You know me," he said, jingling his keys. "I like to keep control of my car." Old habit, Denise rolled her eyes but didn't argue. She knew him too well. Out on Main Street, the air was cooler than they expected, a faint breeze cutting through the city heat. Streetlights glowed amber, washing the brick facades with color. Traffic was steady but not heavy, a typical Friday night flow. Anthony unlocked the Tahoe, glancing up and down the street out of habit more than concern. Years in law enforcement had trained him to scan, to read body language, to take in details most people ignored. He noticed a group of college kids laughing outside a bar across the street, a man walking his dog near the corner, a delivery truck unloading boxes 2 blocks down. Nothing unusual. Denise was a few steps behind him, adjusting her purse strap. "You ever gonna relax, even for one night?" she teased. Anthony smiled faintly. "Relaxing's how you miss what's right in front of you." They were just about to get inside when the red and blue flash lit up the street. A patrol car slowed, then swerved sharply into the space behind Anthony's Tahoe. Doors flung open, flashlights cut across the sidewalk. Denise's steps faltered. "What is this?" she whispered. Anthony stayed calm, though his jaw set. He'd been through stops before, both as a cop and as a black man in America. He knew how quickly things could spiral if emotions led the way. As the officers barked orders, Anthony lifted his hands and turned his head slightly toward Denise. His voice was soft, meant only for her. "Stay back. Don't say too much. Let me handle this." Denise's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. "Handle it? They think you're—" "I know," Anthony cut her off gently. "Just trust me." But she didn't feel safe. Not for him, not for herself. She'd watched too many videos, heard too many names on the news. And now, it wasn't some story about someone else. It was her husband, steps away from their car, hands raised under the glare of flashing lights. And while Anthony tried to project calm, deep down he knew this was no routine stop. This was a storm about to break. "Hands up! Step away from the vehicle!" The first officer's voice cut through the night, sharp and commanding. His flashlight beam locked onto Anthony's face, blinding him. The second officer flanked the Tahoe, his hand hovering near his holster. Their movements were quick, rehearsed, like they had already decided what kind of man they were dealing with. Anthony lifted his hands higher, fingers spread. "My name's Anthony Rhodes. I don't know what this is about, but I'm cooperating." Denise stood frozen near the restaurant entrance, her phone halfway out of her purse. Her voice cracked. "He hasn't done anything. He's just—" "Ma'am, step back," one of the officers barked, slicing the air with his arm. "Don't interfere." Anthony spoke again, calm, deliberate. "Officers, please. My wallet is in my back pocket. If you'll allow me, I can show you ID." But his words rolled right past them. The younger officer pressed forward, grabbing Anthony's left wrist and yanking it downward. The sudden force knocked him off balance. The second officer moved in behind, pushing him against the Tahoe's hood. Anthony grunted, but didn't resist. "I'm not fighting you. I'm not resisting." Still, the pressure on his arms grew tighter. Cold metal kissed his skin as they prepared cuffs. His cheek pressed against the hood. He could see Denise out of the corner of his eye. Her lips moved quickly into her phone, her hand shaking. "Yes, 911? My husband's being assaulted by police outside Papa's Bros. He's not resisting. Please, somebody send help." The irony wasn't lost on Anthony. His wife was calling 911 on the very men who were supposed to serve. "Sir, what are you doing out here this late?" one officer demanded. Anthony's voice remained even. "Having dinner with my wife." "That's all. Driving this vehicle?" "Yes, it's mine." "You have proof of ownership?" "Yes, in the glove box." The officer scoffed. "Convenient," Denise shouted from a few feet away. "He's telling the truth. Look at him. He's not lying." But Anthony gave her a slight shake of his head. He didn't want her rushing closer. Every movement, every word was a risk. The older officer leaned in, his voice low but dripping with suspicion. "You match the description of someone we're looking for. Tall, black male, dark vehicle, leaving the area of a robbery." Anthony inhaled slowly through his nose. He'd heard those words too many times in his career. A vague description broad enough to catch anyone who fit the profile. "Officer," he said carefully, "I think we both know that's not probable cause to treat me this way. I'm cooperating." The officer's grip tightened. "Save it. You're lucky we didn't come in guns drawn." Anthony didn't argue. He knew arguing wouldn't get him anywhere. Not with their adrenaline pumping, not with Denise's voice trembling behind him, not with a crowd beginning to gather on the sidewalk. From somewhere in the distance, a man's voice called out, "Yo, what did he even do? He ain't fighting you." Phones were out now, screens glowing, bystanders whispering, some filming openly, others trying to be discreet. Denise raised her voice, louder this time. "That's my husband!" "He hasn't done a thing." The younger officer turned sharply toward her. "Ma'am, last warning. Step back or we'll take you in too." Her breath hitched, tears brimming. She froze in place. Anthony, still pinned, closed his eyes for half a second. He wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the truth was, he didn't know. He only knew one thing. If he lost his cool now, things could get much worse. So he steadied his breathing, kept his voice low, and said to the officer holding him, "Look, if you reach into my back pocket, you'll find my wallet. Please, just check." The officer sneered, muttering under his breath, "You people always got a story." He reached anyway, And that small motion, fingers sliding into Anthony's back pocket, was about to change everything. But the next thing that fell to the pavement wasn't just a wallet. It was the truth they weren't ready for. The wallet slipped from the officer's grip, hitting the concrete with a dull thud. It wasn't the sound of leather that caught everyone's attention. It was the metallic clink that followed. A small badge slid halfway out, the gold edges glinting under the streetlight. The younger officer squinted, his boot hovering over it. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Denise gasped. She knew that badge. She had seen it placed carefully on their dresser every night, carried with pride every morning. Her voice cracked, echoing across the sidewalk. "Look down! Look at it. That's his badge." The older officer bent, his hand trembling slightly as he picked it up. His flashlight beam washed over the engraved letters, City of Dallas, Chief of Police. For a moment, the street froze. No voices, no footsteps, no car horns, just silence. Anthony turned his head slightly, his cheek still pressed to the Tahoe's hood. His voice was calm but firm, carrying authority even in restraint. "I told you. My name is Anthony Rhodes. I'm the police chief of this city, and you just put me on the ground like a suspect." The officer holding him instantly released pressure, stepping back as if the badge had burned him. The younger officer's mouth fell open. His eyes darted between Anthony's face, the badge, and the growing crowd of bystanders recording everything. Denise rushed forward now, ignoring the earlier warnings. She pressed her hand to Anthony's shoulder. "Baby, are you okay?" Anthony straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders, brushing off his shirt. He didn't answer her right away. His eyes were locked on the two men in uniform before him. "Chief Rhodes," the older officer stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of realization. "Sir, we didn't know." Anthony cut him off, his tone sharp but controlled. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't ask. You didn't listen. You assumed." The younger officer swallowed hard, his flashlight lowering toward the ground. His words stumbled. "Sir, we had a call about a robbery suspect. Tall male, dark SUV. Anthony stepped forward, his presence towering now, not because of his size, but because of who he was. His voice carried not just anger, but disappointment. "And you saw me. A black man, late at night, and that was enough for you. That's all it took." Denise's hands shook as she steadied her husband's arm. She wanted to scream, to curse, but Anthony's composure held her in place. The crowd murmured louder now. Someone yelled from across the street, "Yeah, y'all messed up big time." Another added, "He's your boss." "That's the damn chief." The officers shifted nervously, their faces pale under the flashing lights of their own patrol car. The younger one tried again, his words desperate. "Chief, we didn't mean disrespect." Anthony's eyes narrowed. "You didn't mean? Or you didn't care?" The silence that followed hit heavier than any accusation. Both officers avoided his stare, their shoulders sinking under the weight of truth. Denise whispered near his ear, her voice trembling. "Anthony, please, let's just go. You don't owe them anything." But Anthony shook his head slightly. His gaze never left the two men. "No, this isn't just about me. It's about every man who doesn't have a badge in his pocket to save him when he's thrown against a car." He reached down, plucked the badge from the older officer's hand, and slid it back into his wallet. His movements were deliberate, measured, his authority undeniable. "Look around," he told them, nodding toward the bystanders holding up their phones. "They saw everything. You don't get to erase this. You don't get to explain it away. This is the reality, too many live, every single day." The officers stood speechless, caught between fear of punishment and the shame of exposure. Anthony exhaled slowly, turning to Denise. "Let's go." He unlocked the Tahoe, his hands steady, his face unreadable. He opened the passenger door for her, then circled to his side. Before getting in, he looked back once more at the officers, his words heavy. "You two need to ask yourselves tonight, what if I wasn't the chief? What if I was just another man trying to get home?" But even as Anthony drove away, the weight of what had happened refused to leave the street. For the officers, for the crowd, and for his wife sitting silently beside him, the night had changed everything. The Tahoe's engine hummed quietly as Anthony steered them out of the lot. Denise sat stiff in the passenger seat, arms folded tight, staring out the window. Her reflection trembled in the glass, the flashing lights behind them still staining her vision red and blue. Anthony drove in silence for several blocks, his knuckles tight on the steering wheel. It wasn't until they hit a quieter stretch near Deep Ellum that Denise finally spoke. "You could have been killed tonight," she whispered. Her voice cracked halfway through, her words spilling like a dam breaking. "They had their hands on you like you were nothing." Anthony exhaled slowly, eyes on the road. "I know." "That badge," she went on, shaking her head. "If that badge hadn't fallen out, Anthony—" She trailed off, covering her mouth with her hand. He glanced at her, his face steady but his eyes soft. "That's what scares me too. Not for me, but for every man who doesn't have that badge. That's the reality I live with every day. Tonight, you saw it firsthand." Denise turned toward him, her frustration spilling over. "But you're their boss. You're the one they answer to. How could they not recognize you? How could they treat you like that?" Anthony's jaw flexed. "Because to them, in that moment, I wasn't their boss. I wasn't a husband leaving dinner with his wife. I was just another black man near a nice car at night." That's all they saw. Denise swallowed hard. "And tomorrow, they'll clock back in like nothing happened." Anthony's eyes flickered with something between anger and resolve. "Tomorrow, there's going to be a conversation. But tonight's a reminder of why I do this job, Denise, why I can't afford to turn away." For a moment, neither spoke. The city lights slid past the windows, neon signs and street lamps painting the inside of the Tahoe in bursts of color. The weight of the silence pressed heavier than the shouting had minutes before. Finally, Denise broke it. "I was scared to death, Anthony. Not just because of what was happening, but because I realized your badge doesn't make you safe. And if you're not safe, then who is?" Anthony reached over, resting his hand gently on hers. His voice was low, thoughtful. "That's the question we all need to ask." The Tahoe rolled through a green light, the streets thinning as they neared home. Anthony's thoughts turned inward, but his grip on Denise's hand stayed firm. Tonight wasn't just another bad encounter. It was a mirror, showing both of them something they could never ignore again. But while the car carried them home, the story wasn't finished. Because the real test wasn't what happened on the street. It was what Anthony would do when morning came. Back at the scene, the two officers stood frozen beside their squad car, watching the Tahoe's taillights fade into the distance. The crowd hadn't dispersed. People were still holding up their phones, recording, murmuring to one another. A young man in a hoodie shook his head and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That was your chief. Y'all slammed your own boss like he was trash. You're done." The older officer rubbed his forehead, his voice low and strained. "This is bad. This is real bad." The younger one shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting from the crowd to the ground. "He'll understand, right? We thought—" "Understand?" The older one snapped. "You put the police chief in cuffs. On camera. You think he's just gonna forget?" Their voices carried, feeding the whispers among the bystanders. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket folded her arms and called out, "Now you know what it feels like to get caught doing what you always do." The younger officer turned, his face flushed. "Ma'am, you don't know the whole story," she scoffed. "We saw enough." The tension grew thicker, the officers realizing every word was being captured, every move dissected. A teenage boy, phone steady in his hand, shouted, "Say cheese, officers!" "This is going viral tonight," the older cop snapped at his partner. "Let's clear the scene before this gets worse." But it was too late. Their worst fears were already unraveling. Meanwhile, in the Tahoe just a few blocks away, Denise sat gripping Anthony's hand as if letting go meant losing him. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. "Do you think they'll try to cover it up?" she asked softly. Anthony's eyes stayed forward, but his tone carried weight. "They can try, but the cameras won't let them, and I won't either." Denise bit her lip. "You sounded so calm back there. But inside, were you scared?" Anthony didn't answer right away. He let the question linger in the quiet before finally speaking. "I wasn't scared for me. I was scared for you. I was scared for how fast it could have gone wrong. If someone twitched the wrong way, if I raised my voice just once, we wouldn't be driving home right now." Denise's throat tightened. She turned to the window, blinking fast, trying to push back tears. "You shouldn't have to live like that," she whispered. "No one should." Back on Main Street, the crowd had started to thin, but the damage was already done. The woman in the denim jacket muttered to a friend, "They're shaking now because they realize who he was. But if it had been anybody else, we'd be talking about another funeral tomorrow." The friend nodded, her voice heavy. "And that's the truth. Badge or no badge, this is what happens too often." The officers exchanged glances, their radios crackling faintly. Neither spoke. Neither knew what to say. The weight of the mistake pressed down on them like armor they couldn't take off. At home later that night, Anthony placed his badge on the dresser with deliberate care. He stared at it for a long moment, the gold reflecting faintly in the lamplight. Denise came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You shouldn't have to prove who you are to be treated like a human being," she said softly. Anthony placed his hand over hers. His eyes never left the badge. "That's the lesson I'm taking with me tomorrow. If this can happen to me, with this badge in my pocket, then what's happening to everyone else?" Denise rested her cheek against his back. "Then you make them listen, Anthony. You make them see." But as Anthony lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he knew the real fight was only beginning. Tomorrow would bring questions, meetings, and headlines, and no badge could shield him from the truth that had just played out in the street. By sunrise, the videos were everywhere. Clips of Anthony Rhodes being shoved against his own Tahoe flooded social media. Comment sections burned with outrage. Local news anchors replayed the footage, their voices heavy with disbelief. Dallas police chief mistaken for a suspect during late-night stop. At City Hall, the mayor's phone buzzed non-stop. Council members demanded answers. Community leaders called for accountability. And inside his own department, whispers spread faster than official memos. Anthony walked into headquarters just after 8. Every pair of eyes in the lobby followed him. Some officers straightened their posture, others dropped their gaze. The silence wasn't respect, it was unease. Chief Rhodes didn't break stride. His leather shoes clicked across the marble floor, steady and deliberate. When he entered the conference room, a dozen senior officers were already waiting. The older officer from the night before sat stiff near the end of the table, his partner beside him, both pale and restless. They avoided Anthony's eyes as he placed his badge on the table, the gold catching the morning light. Anthony looked around the room. His voice was measured, calm, but carried weight. "Last night wasn't about me. Last night was about the culture we've allowed to grow. 2 of our own treated the chief of police like a criminal before they even asked a single question. If that doesn't tell us something about how we approach this job, nothing will." A captain shifted uncomfortably. "Chief, the men said they were responding to a description." Tall, black male, dark SUV. Anthony cut him off. "That's not a description. That's a stereotype. And if you think that excuses what happened, you're part of the problem." The room fell silent. Anthony leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "I won't ask you if you're embarrassed this happened to me. I'll ask you something harder. What if it hadn't been me? What if it was a father driving home from work, or a teenager heading back from a game, or a man just walking to his car? What happens when there's no badge to fall out of the wallet?" The weight of his words pressed into every corner of the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Anthony turned to the 2 officers at the end of the table. "You should be asking yourselves that question every day for the rest of your careers." Denise's words from the night before echoed in his mind. Make them listen. Make them see. He straightened, picking up his badge. "We're going to change how we train, how we supervise, and how we hold one another accountable. If you can't handle that, hand me your resignation today, because this department will not keep repeating the same mistakes." Some officers nodded slowly, others looked down at the table. But Anthony didn't wait for a response. He stood, pocketed his badge, and walked out, leaving the weight of responsibility behind for them to carry. But as he stepped back into the morning sun, Anthony knew the harder part was still ahead, because changing policy was one thing, changing hearts was another. That night, Anthony sat on the porch of his home, the cicadas buzzing faintly in the Texas heat. Denise joined him with 2 glasses of iced tea, settling into the chair beside his. For a while, they just sat in silence, the weight of the past 24 hours lingering between them. Finally, Denise spoke. "Feels like the whole city's talking about it. Everywhere I look, news, social media, church group texts, it's all about you." Anthony shook his head gently. "It's not about me. It's about what people saw. about what too many already knew. She studied him, the porch light catching the faint lines on his face. So what happens now? He leaned back, staring at the dark stretch of sky above them. Now, I keep pushing. I use this as proof. Proof that it's not just stories on the news. It's not exaggeration. It's real. If the chief of police can be profiled on his own street, then nobody is immune. Denise reached over, squeezing his hand. And if they don't listen? Anthony turned to her, his eyes steady. Then we make them listen. Not with anger alone, but with change. With policies, with accountability, with conversations that make people uncomfortable. Because comfort has never saved lives. Truth does. The screen door creaked open, and their teenage daughter stepped outside, curious eyes flicking between her parents. "Dad, are you okay?" Anthony's voice softened. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Then he added, more for her than for himself. "But last night reminded me that I have work to do. Work that makes sure you grow up in a world where nights like that don't happen." His daughter nodded slowly, then slipped back inside, leaving Anthony and Denise alone again. Anthony sipped his tea, his voice almost a whisper. This job was never about titles, or badges, or power. It's about people. Protecting them, respecting them, and proving by action that they matter. Denise leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then that's the story people need to hear." Anthony didn't answer right away. He just sat, the night air wrapping around them, knowing that change wasn't going to be quick, and it wasn't going to be easy. But maybe, just maybe, what happened outside that restaurant could open eyes that had stayed shut for too long. And here's the lesson for all of us. You don't need a badge or a title to demand fairness, respect, and justice. You just need the courage to speak up, the patience to listen, and the will to treat others the way you want to be treated. If you've ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken, let this be your reminder. Silence changes nothing. Speak for those who can't. Record when you see wrong. Hold people accountable, whether they wear a uniform or not. Because the measure of a community isn't in how it treats its leaders. It's in how it treats its most ordinary people. So here's my call to you. Share this story. Talk about it at your dinner table, in your classrooms, in your churches, in your workplaces. Keep the conversation alive. Because the day we stop talking about it is the day nothing changes. And change starts with us.